Welcome back to Rapid Report, your trusted source for in-depth, real-time news analysis from around the globe. Today, we're diving into an unprecedented constitutional crisis unfolding in the United States as President Trump openly defies Congress, weaponizes federal agencies, and ignites debates over the 25th Amendment and impeachment in 2026. Stay with us as we break down every key development, analyze the legal and political implications, and explore what this could mean for American democracy and the world. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily updates. If you find our coverage insightful, smash that like button and share this video with friends and colleagues who want a deeper understanding of today's political events. Let's get into it. The United States is entering what many observers are calling a severe constitutional crisis, triggered by escalating confrontations between President Donald Trump and Congress. In recent weeks, Trump has made unprecedented public remarks, defying calls to resign and framing his ongoing political battles as a struggle against what he labels traitors in the legislative branch. Democratic lawmakers, alarmed by his rhetoric and actions, are openly questioning the president's mental fitness, invoking the 25th Amendment, and preparing impeachment measures targeted for 2026. The stakes could not be higher. The future of American democracy may hinge on the midterm elections in just under 2 years. A constitutional crisis emerges. The remarks and actions of President Trump have stunned political analysts and constitutional scholars alike. His public declarations, refusing to step down under any circumstances, ordering investigations against sitting lawmakers, and amplifying posts that call for extreme punitive measures, are being described by critics as authoritarian and unprecedented in the history of the American presidency. Democratic leaders have increasingly invoked the 25th Amendment, a constitutional provision allowing for the removal of a president deemed unfit for office. The calls for its application are grounded in growing concerns over Trump's decision-making and psychological state. Sources indicate that these discussions are closely tied to strategic planning for the 2026 midterm elections, where Democrats hope to secure a House majority capable of initiating formal impeachment proceedings. Trump refuses to resign and declares war on Congress. President Trump has made clear that resignation is not an option. In multiple statements, he has vowed that he will never resign, framing such a move as a betrayal of the American people. More alarmingly, reports suggest that he has directed the Department of Justice to investigate and potentially indict several Democratic lawmakers on charges related to their opposition to him. This move, unprecedented in modern U.S. political history, has prompted comparisons to autocratic tactics, as critics argue that Trump is weaponizing federal law enforcement against the legislative branch, a direct challenge to the separation of powers enshrined in the Constitution. The Greenland annexation controversy. Adding fuel to the fire is the so-called Greenland annexation episode. According to investigative reports, Trump became fixated on the idea of annexing Greenland after failing to receive a Nobel Peace Prize. While the plan itself may have been quixotic, Democrats cite it as a telling example of erratic and potentially dangerous presidential decision-making. The Greenland controversy has intensified calls for invoking the 25th Amendment, with lawmakers and political commentators pointing to it as evidence of unfitness for office. The debate reflects growing unease that the president may be guided by personal grievances rather than national interest, raising urgent questions about judgment and temperament. Impeachment momentum builds. In parallel with concerns over the president's behavior, Democrats have quietly begun preparing articles of impeachment, positioning the 2026 midterm elections as a referendum on Trump's continued occupancy of the Oval Office. Party leaders emphasize the historical stakes, noting that a successful impeachment effort would not only hold the president accountable, but also reaffirm the norms and institutions that undergird American democracy. Sources within the Democratic caucus stress that these plans are contingent on regaining control of the House. Without that majority, the process faces significant obstacles, underscoring the interconnection between electoral politics and constitutional remedies. DOJ indictments and treason accusations. Perhaps most alarming is the reported involvement of the Department of Justice in investigating 6 Democratic lawmakers. The charges reportedly involve allegations of inciting insubordination, a legal standard critics say is a distortion of both legislative and military law. Trump has amplified social media posts calling for extreme punishments for his critics, framing such measures as a defense of the presidency. Legal scholars argue that these actions represent an unprecedented expansion of executive power into the legislative realm, undermining traditional checks and balances and raising serious concerns about the politicization of law enforcement. Republican anxiety and silence. While some Republican lawmakers are privately uneasy about the president's actions, public criticism remains virtually absent. Sources indicate that party members fear political backlash, including primary challenges, public attacks, and voter mobilization against them. This silence, however, has drawn criticism from across the political spectrum. Observers warn that by failing to challenge the president's overreach, Republican leaders are complicit in undermining democratic norms and allowing executive overreach to proceed unchecked. Explaining the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare a president unfit for office, triggering temporary transfer of power. However, practical application is complicated in this context. Current Vice President J.D. Vance is widely reported to be loyal to Trump, significantly limiting the amendment's immediate effectiveness. This loyalty underscores the difficulty of relying on constitutional mechanisms when political alignment and personal allegiance override institutional checks. Weaponization of DOJ against lawmakers. Legal experts note that the reported charges against Democratic lawmakers stretch conventional interpretation of law. The notion of inciting insubordination traditionally applies to military personnel, not elected legislators. Critics argue that these indictments are retaliatory in nature, designed to intimidate political opponents, rather than pursue legitimate justice. Such actions, if carried out, would represent a dangerous precedent, the executive branch using federal law enforcement not to uphold the law, but to punish political dissent. Democracy at risk. The unfolding crisis has created a climate of fear in Washington, where lawmakers are reportedly hesitant to speak out against the president. Analysts warn that this silencing effect poses a direct threat to the separation of powers, a foundational principle of American governance. Ultimately, the resolution of this crisis will rest with voters in 2026. As Democrats mobilize for the midterm elections and Republicans navigate internal anxieties, the nation faces a pivotal choice: whether to reaffirm its democratic institutions or permit unprecedented executive overreach to go unchecked. The stakes are nothing less than the preservation of the United States as a functioning republic. As President Trump continues to defy norms, direct federal investigations at lawmakers, and amplify rhetoric that challenges the very foundations of American democracy, the United States finds itself at a crossroads. The next 2 years, culminating in the 2026 midterm elections, may well determine whether the nation upholds its constitutional framework or succumbs to a new era of political authoritarianism. A constitutional maelstrom. The current situation is not just a clash between a president and Congress. It is a profound stress test of American constitutional institutions. Historically, the United States has relied on norms, traditions, and the restraint of political actors to prevent crises from spiraling. What is emerging now, however, is a scenario where these informal checks are being tested to their limits. Trump's direct ordering of the Department of Justice to investigate elected legislators represents a radical departure from precedent. Even under highly controversial presidents, the executive branch has never been weaponized in such an openly political manner. Scholars argue that this represents a novel form of legalized coercion, where federal law enforcement is being leveraged not to uphold law and order, but to intimidate political opponents. This raises critical questions. What happens when the president uses the instruments of the state against the legislative branch? Can Congress assert its constitutional prerogatives without provoking escalation into outright institutional conflict? The psychological dimension. While some analysts focus on legal mechanics, others highlight the psychological dimensions of Trump's behavior. The Greenland episode, often treated humorously in popular discourse, is now being cited as a concrete illustration of impulsive decision-making driven by personal grievance. In this case, perceived slights such as not receiving a Nobel Peace Prize. Political psychologists warn that such fixation on personal recognition, rather than national interest, may signal deteriorating judgment, justifying the invocation of the 25th Amendment. This is compounded by the president's public labeling of critics as traitors and his amplification of extremist content on social media. Such rhetoric not only polarizes public opinion, but can also normalize threats against political adversaries, further destabilizing the political environment. Legal and historical implications of DOJ indictments. The reported DOJ indictments against Democratic lawmakers on charges like inciting insubordination are unprecedented in scope. Historically, U.S. law has distinguished between political speech, legislative dissent, and criminal behavior. By reframing legislative opposition as a prosecutable offense, the executive is challenging the very principle of representative democracy. If pursued, these actions may provoke landmark legal challenges, potentially elevating the dispute to the Supreme Court. This raises another critical question. How will judicial institutions respond when the president is accused of using federal agencies as instruments of political revenge? Legal scholars warn that the judiciary's response could define executive-legislative relations for generations. The Republican dilemma. Republicans face a delicate calculus. Privately, some fear that Trump's aggressive use of federal power could backfire politically or even legally implicate them. Publicly, however, silence dominates. Political analysts interpret this as strategic self-preservation, a fear that criticizing Trump could provoke primary challenges or alienate the Republican base. This tacit complicity raises long-term concerns for the party's institutional credibility. By enabling the weaponization of federal law enforcement and tolerating threats to constitutional norms, the Republican Party risks being seen not as a counterweight to potential authoritarianism, but as an accomplice. Implications for international perception. Trump's actions do not only affect domestic politics. Global allies and adversaries alike are watching closely. The perception of a U.S. president willing to threaten lawmakers and manipulate federal law enforcement could undermine America's moral authority on human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Partners may question the reliability of the U.S. as a defender of democratic norms, while authoritarian regimes could cite this as validation of their own heavy-handed approaches. The role of the 2026 midterms. Ultimately, the 2026 midterm elections are shaping up to be a referendum not just on party control, but on the survival of institutional norms. If Democrats regain the House, impeachment becomes plausible. If Republicans retain or expand control, Trump's actions may go unchecked. Analysts argue that voter engagement will be crucial. The election could either reinforce the system of checks and balances or signal a dangerous erosion of democratic accountability. Democracy at a crossroads. What is unfolding is a rare existential test for U.S. democracy. The combination of executive defiance, DOJ weaponization, partisan silence, and public polarization has created a constitutional pressure cooker. The outcome will not only shape the immediate political landscape, but also set precedents about the limits of presidential power, the independence of Congress, and the resilience of legal institutions in the United States. That wraps up today's deep dive on the unfolding U.S. constitutional crisis. We've explored Trump's refusal to resign, the reported DOJ indictments of lawmakers, the Greenland controversy, and the looming 2026 midterm elections that may determine the future of American democracy. The situation is evolving quickly, and Rapid Report will be here to bring you accurate, detailed updates as events unfold. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You'll be the first to know when new developments break. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, share it with your network, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think about this unprecedented moment in U.S. history. Remember, every like, share, and subscription helps us continue delivering high-quality, independent news coverage. Thanks for watching Rapid Report, where we bring the news into focus.